Hello YouTube, I am Sutek94, and I am here today to talk about a long-forgotten, long-dead, long-out-of-print collectible card game from the mid-90s that, for some reason, grabbed hold of my attention as of recent. Maybe it's the fact that this game plays similarly to Magic the Gathering, a game I've been playing on and off for well over a decade by now. Maybe it's because I'm a bit of a space nut. In any case, I am here to talk about Galactic Empires. This game came out in August of 1994, during a time when a lot of companies were beginning to take notice of how successful Magic was becoming. They wanted a share of that freshly baked CCG pie that Magic was serving up. Companion Games' entry into the fray was Galactic Empires, which they claimed was the first sci-fi themed trading card game. I mean, look at that tagline, the science fiction trading card game. And, well, they were right. This game was released before the licensed Star Trek, Star Wars, and Babylon 5 CCGs came out. If you want to know what happened to Companion Games and why you've never heard of them until this video, they went bankrupt in early 1997, effectively ending Galactic Empires then and there. There were plans for a GE-based board game that never materialized. Well, it actually kind of did, considering the company morphed into something called Component Game Systems later in '97, and they published board games based off of Babylon 5 and Star Trek, all of which were based off of that never-released Galactic Empires board game. There's a bit of trivia to carry with you to the pub. Back to the card game Galactic Empires. I should point out that I have zero personal experience with this game when it was new. I was very young in those days. In fact, I only recently found out about the game's existence. I was browsing through sealed Magic the Gathering products on eBay one day, and I came across some sealed booster boxes of Galactic Empires, inexplicably listed under the sealed MTG section of eBay. Since they were cheap, I decided to buy a few, because I found myself curious about one of Magic's many alternatives from the 1990s. $60 later, I had a sealed booster box of the first edition, or Series 1 as they call it, a sealed booster box of the Time Gates expansion, and a box of Series 1 starter, basic decks. The deck box was already opened, which doesn't matter because all the decks seem to have the exact same cards, and this was something I knew about before I got these in the mail. The guy who sold everything slipped in a couple of boosters in that box. One booster pack of Time Gates, and one from the Powers of the Mind expansion. Thanks, man! Right now, let's talk rules. Strap yourselves in, because this is going to get complicated. Galactic Empires plays similarly to Magic, in the sense that you have a set of resource cards, terrain cards in this case, that give you a set amount of specific points that allow you to play and use ships, bases, and other cards. The number of ships and bases and such you play are restricted by the amount of players in the game. You can increase this number by increasing your number of command points. The ultimate goal is to capture the enemy sector. Each player has a sector HQ with 25 hit points. And I think you can figure that part of the game out. I'll also show you this insert from the Series 1 basic decks explaining what all those fancy looking symbols mean in the corners of the cards. Speaking of corners of cards, look at the top left of these cards, where it says something like T3 or S2. The letter indicates the type of card, and the number indicates the card's strength, its hit points in other words. T indicates a terrain card, while S indicates a ship card. Terrain can only be destroyed by cards which specifically target terrain. Incoming paragraph solely explaining ship cards, as per the rulebook. Ships can have a number of shield points which count towards its hit points. For instance, a ship with 2 strength and 2 shields takes 4 damage to destroy. Easy, right? Next, we have these symbols up top which indicate the exact number of points needed to actually use the ship to its fullest potential for one turn. A ship that does not have its full quota of supply and energy points can't fire its weapons or, well, do anything outside of operated shields and conduct repairs via repair points. Crew cards played on these ships can only do things which don't require equipment cards or firing weapons. Next up are these things at the bottom, these squares and pluses. Pluses are standard phasers, and they do not require any special resources to use. unlike the squares, which are a special weapon. The rulebook calls these heavy weapons, which do require resources to use in the form of ammo points. I should probably explain points for a minute. The most common type of point is economy points, usually generated by terrains. Each one of these points is a Swiss Army knife. They can be used as literally any other type of point in the game, such as supply and energy points. Ammo points, like I mentioned earlier, are used for a ship's heavy weapons. Research points are used against monster and occurrence cards, with the rules on how to defeat or negate these varying by card. And yes, this is another game where if the rules of the card go against the rules of the game, the card wins. Repair points are used on bases, ships, and equipment to, well, repair them. You can restore shields this way as well. The rulebook points out that you can't repair a destroyed ship or base. No Sherlock. It also says you can't repair your sector HQ. However, you can repair terrain, but only if it was damaged by heavy weapons. Back to ship cards, because I haven't even mentioned the fact that you can only use one Empire's ships in your deck. Unless it says mercenary or pirate, or if it's something like a tug or a freighter which can be used by everybody, it doesn't belong unless it's affiliated with your empire. Bases are similar to ships with one exception. They can only be played on terrain. They act as shielding for the terrain in the fact that you have to destroy the base first before you can attack the terrain. Both ships and bases are played tapped and disengaged. Good old summoning sickness effects here. Reaction cards remind me of instants from Magic for one reason. You can play them during another player's turn as a response to an action on that player's part. These cards usually have a dual type like R/E2. Crew cards are played on bases, ships, or terrain, and thankfully do not require food points to operate, nor do they generate fecal points. Some crew need specific equipment, and you can move them around via things like shuttles or transporters. They can also be played on any ship, unless that card says otherwise. Equipment cards are self-explanatory, and are usually played on ships and bases. Some equipment needs energy points or can be used only by a specific empire. Again, it depends on the card. Occurrence cards are special. The rulebook seems to suggest that you can play these on players, but actually what I think this means is you can play them on your cards or your opponent's cards. This is one where you really have to look at the card and see how it works. Luck cards are similar, but they deal with situations where luck comes into play. Hazard cards are usually played on bases and ships, but depending on the card, you can also target terrains. In each case, they deal a set amount of insert effect here against a target, usually damage or some other points. Finally, we have the monster cards, the wild cards of the game, played on specific targets to ruin their day. They're basically sentient occurrence or hazard cards. Okay, I seriously hope you caught all that. As far as decks go, you need at least 5 cards of each type and a minimum of 50 cards, but no bigger than 150. One interesting rule is that you have to have 1 card for each strength level up to the card with the highest strength per type. For instance, if I had a ship that's S7, I would need at least 1 card with strength 1 through 6 as well. Oh, and no more than 2 cards with strength higher than 5 allowed per deck. And now we finally come to the turn structure, which again is similar to Magic. Going back to that insert card, we see that the turns are broken up into 8 phases. Allocation of points, engagement, which means that all ships and bases which had their supply quota filled are turned vertical. Otherwise, they're tapped and turned off, or disengaged as the rules call them. First main phase, attack. Second main phase, discard, draw, and finally, end turn. Each player can play a maximum of 3 cards during their turn. The attack phase goes like this. The firing player lines up targets, allocating damage. The other player may play cards in response. Firing player may play cards in response to that response, or alter their ship's firing. The attacks resolve, and repeat until all targets or weapons are exhausted. You can only damage a target once. Discarding counts towards that 3-card limit I mentioned earlier, and a player can even hit the self-destruct button on their ships by discarding them. from play. There's also no limit to how many cards you can have in your hand at any time. Drawing cards works like this: 9 or fewer, draw 2. 10 or 11, draw 1. 12 or higher, draw 0. Oh, and drawing is optional, which means it's impossible to lose the game by being forced into drawing something that isn't there. The first couple of turns have their own rules. During turn 1, you can play only terrains. During turn 2, you can play a max of 1 ship or base. Then there's the reserve fleet. This involves each player setting aside a certain number of cards from their deck face down equal to the number of players, with no restrictions on type, strength, or anything like that. These cards are not exposed until ante has been drawn. Thankfully, ante in this game does not work like ante in Magic, though ante-Magic style is an optional rule. I'm not even going to get into explaining how ante worked in Magic because I think that was kind of a dumb rule. In Galactic Empires, players ante cards by discarding or setting aside the top card of their deck. The player who has the card with the highest strength gets to go first. Back to the reserve fleet. A player can use one of their 3 plays to swap out a card from their hand for a card from the reserve fleet. According to the rulebook, the card placed into the reserve fleet must be of equal or higher strength than the card removed. I feel like I've hit most of the key rules of the game by this point. Mind you, I'm going off of Series 1 rules. I know there's a revised rulebook out there that can easily be found online. I'm not going to go into too much detail into things like shuffling, cutting, or the opening draw, since all that seems to work just like Magic, except for the fact that the opening draw consists of 9 cards instead of 7. There are other rule sets like tournament rules and free-for-all, which I won't get into in this video. And I'm also aware of other card types like agendas, psi cards, and ability cards, which, that last one, from what I understand, they're basically like enchantments from Magic. Now that I've gotten the massive amount of rules out of the way, how long have I been here for? About 12 minutes or so at this point. Let's get to the cards themselves. Series 1 cards have a feel to them not unlike bee or bicycle playing cards, and that's because the cards are made similarly. You often see Series 1 divided up into alpha and beta print runs, with seemingly no obvious way to differentiate between the two, outside of looking at card lists. Series 1 also had about 90 cards total. The back of the basic deck boxes suggests that there were 92 cards in Series 1, but all other sources I've seen say the total is actually around 90. I wonder if this includes cards with many variations of artwork, something even Magic was trying out at that time with random commons and such from the Fallen Empires expansion. Card rarity is kinda hard to determine with this set. Series 1 was also distributed in booster packs with 10 cards per pack. The first 6 cards in each pack are commons, and the next 4, 7, 8, 9, and 10, are labeled booster cards. The 6th card in each pack is the rare, whenever one does show up, and I guess you could call the rest uncommon, though, again, unless you're going off a card list, this isn't easy to tell. And yes, I did say that there is a chance that you won't get a rare from a booster. One site I saw even suggests that a few Series 1 booster boxes didn't have rares, period. Bear in mind that we are talking about the August of 1994 release, literally the very first release of the game. I guess they were still trying to feel things out. Later on, starting with the Primary Edition, or Series 2, released in December of 1994, Companions switched over to regular smooth cardstock, consistent with many other games. In both cases, there's some pretty interesting printing errors. In the Time Gates expansion, one card, the R/E2 Stasis Canister, had a misprint that was never fixed as far as I know. Have you ever heard of a status canister? Even more baffling is the fact that the card's name is printed in the exact same font in the rules text. You would think something like that would have been fixed, but apparently it wasn't. In Series 1, there seems to be a lot of off-center prints. The fronts want to escape off the top, but the backs don't. I haven't seen any big-time misprints though, like actual miscuts and such. I've heard that some of the very last expansions had several big-time typos and such, because they were rushed to production, presumably because Companion Games was in serious financial trouble by then. And who needs quality when you can pitch something out and hope money flows back in? One thing is for certain when we look at the smooth cards. Again, these are from the Time Gates expansion. Compared to the Series 1 cards, the Time Gates cards quality in general is far superior. Part of the reason the quality went up so much is because a lot of well-known CCG artists, such as Mark Poole, Doug Chaffee, and Ed Beard, among others, came on to do art for Galactic Empires by that point. Compare that to Series 1 artwork, some of which looks like a 12-year-old raided a Crayola factory. I'm sure these artists were trying, but man was the output terrible. I can see people being turned off this game solely by that artwork. Oh, and let's not forget the fact that some of the artwork is literally photographs of literal, actual, real-life solar system locations, such as Neptune and Europa. This is a practice that continued on and off throughout the game's lifespan. The older cards have these flat card frame borders. They look cheap, much like some of the artwork. On the later cards, there's this beveling that's present that gives the cards sort of a 3D appearance. From what I've read, this was introduced around the time the Powers of the Mind expansion came out, early 1995. One thing that both card styles share is frames that result in text that is somewhat hard to read. It's a bigger problem with the older cards compared to the newer stuff. These frames look like somebody got a bunch of random 1990s computer desktop wallpapers and threw it up onto the cards. Seriously, take a look at this and tell me, does this look similar to something you'd see on one of these cards? Oh, and try reading the text and symbols at the top of this card. Don't get me wrong, I am glad that the quality of the cards, in terms of printing that is, improved after a little bit of time. Heck, this card has a little bit of a shine to it. Save for an uncommon German version of Series 2, which had gold-bordered cards, this game is English only. In total, there were 9 expansions released between 94 and 97, as well as 3 core sets, the Alpha and Beta print runs, Series 1, the Primary Edition, Series 2, and the Universe Edition, released in late 1995. Of course, there were plans for more expansions, but they went under when Companion Games went under. And I haven't even mentioned the promo cards yet. Yeah, there were tons of promo cards, so many that they're often considered a set itself. If Wikipedia is any indication, there are apparently 315 promo cards in total, and these seem to be the rarest cards. At the very least, those cards seem to be the ones that fetch the highest prices when they show up on eBay. Other online dealers may sell these as well, that's something I haven't checked. Speaking of prices, if you've reached this point in the video and are interested in getting into this game or getting a hold of some of the cards, sealed product and card lots are actually pretty easy to come across on eBay. I'll toss a link in the description for the eBay seller I bought my Galactic Empires stuff from. He seems to have a lot of stuff in stock, and right now his prices are very decent. Even then, prices for sealed booster boxes in general are low relative to even a sealed booster box of the Fallen Empires expansion for Magic. The only reason prices are low is because there just isn't that much demand for a product like this. Even the German language product, as uncommon as it supposedly is, seems to be cheap. Though, as ever, it seems like the best cards fetch the highest prices, and as supply goes down, the prices go up. So, what about playing the game? Well, coming into writing this script, I haven't actually played any games of GE, nor do I think I'll get any of my friends to play with me. Therefore, I only have other people's reactions to bounce off of. I've noticed that many people have complained about the rules being too complicated. Even I thought this way at first, though after reading the rules mostly for the sake of this video, I'd say it's not as complicated as a few people make it out to be, at least for the base game. Later expansions, such as the Time Gates and Persona expansions, seem to have their own rule sets which complicated things even further. I mentioned earlier I do have some Time Gates stuff, and I may do a video about that expansion sometime later. Anyways, another common complaint I've seen is that the game favors whoever has the advantage after a few minutes into the game, and a single game can take up to an hour or even longer, so grab yourself a drink and some food because you might be playing for a while. On the other hand, I've heard that a lot of people do like this game and that it's genuinely fun. Even today, there still are people out there that play this as it was originally intended. It might be hard to find somebody to play this with in real life. Again, I doubt I'll be able to get one or more of my friends to play this, but alternative methods of playing do exist. One of the more intriguing ways of playing this game nowadays that I found whilst doing some research for this video is playing by forum, where 2 or more people get together on an online forum such as Board Game Geek and play using physical cards, typing their moves and their current board state into separate posts. It's slow and clunky, and I'm not entirely sure if I'd recommend this method, but it works, and I'll toss a link into the description for some examples of games played entirely through an online forum. There doesn't seem to be any other way of playing this online. Tabletop Simulator has no Galactic Empires content available in its workshop, and of course there is nothing like Magic's Duels of the Planeswalkers games. So, to wrap things up, I just wanted to say that I made this video more to educate and share my knowledge of this game with everybody else, not to convince people that they must buy this immediately. However, if you have reached this far into the video and are interested in getting into this game or getting a hold of some of the cards, I did mention that sealed product is cheap for the most part, and that seems to be the best way to get a hold of a lot of cards quickly. I can't give any kind of recommendation because, again, I haven't even played an actual game as of yet. But maybe I'll have a go at some point. I think that about does it for this video. If you have any questions, comments, or even crazy stories about this game, feel free to share. I am Sutek94, and hopefully I'll see you soon, and I hope you enjoyed watching.